All right, g'day everybody. Welcome along to the next webinar, the seasonal update webinar that is funded by the TAS Farm Innovation Hub. What we're going to do is put this on mute, so it was like hearing the attendees coming in. What we're going to do is this one, I've flip-flopped a bit with the topic of today. So kind of what I've done is pretty much gone spring FFS. It's been pretty windy. Big, large rainfalls have come and gone. For some people it's been good, for some people it hasn't. So what we're going to do today is there's a theme of today which I want to run with. And for those who grown up in my era and only had ABC TV, this was something that was played on ABC every New Year's Eve for some reason, so I've watched it a good half a dozen times waiting for the fireworks. But I've kind of put a twist onto this one, which kind of highlight the theme of today. Instead of singing in the rain, it's going to be digging in the rain. So it's going to be understanding these large rainfall events that we have in spring that can get us very nervous, especially around irrigation, whether we turn the irrigator on and off, and how do we go about it. So the outline for today will be, firstly, I'll chuck it over to Ruben Wells, founder of AgLogic, and he will talk about the background, the unpredictability of the spring rains and where they're coming from and why they come as they do. Then I'll jump back on and have a chat about how to manage irrigation when these rain patterns are on the way. And the key considerations we need to put in place when we see this 40 mil coming on the weather app, and what the number one, what that Ruben will talk about what that means, but then how do we use that data in terms of how we're irrigating up to that rainfall event. And with that, I'll be using some real-time examples, mainly coming from conversations that I have with clients of ours who have probes and are in exactly that situation. And then we'll run through the seasonal outlook, which are dryland moisture probes. So I guess why with these conversations I'm having with people that are quite nervous around these rainfall events, especially with their types of crop. The main reason why for a lot of guys is this was last year. So that just early December last year, we had, so in Longford, we had 95 mils of rain come through, and it had a pretty ordinary impact on particularly poppies and peas and things like that. And if we went further up the northwest coast, the guys up around there, they had that 130 mils plus of rainfall. Sorry, I haven't. Oh, there's something going wrong with sharing. Let me just try that again. Cool. There we go. I'll just for the sake of this, I'll just pop back. Yep. So these rainfall events that we had in last year in Longford, as I said, and on the northwest coast, these are still fresh on people's minds in terms of what impacts that they had, particularly on those waterlog or those crops that are sensitive to waterlogging. So conversations I've had around this is, yeah, people are still gun shy from last year. So this will be a big reason of what we're talking about today. So I'll hand it over to Ruben, and yeah, you can have a chat about these weather systems that are coming across.
Thanks, mate. Just get my screen sharing and get me on. And right, I just was keen to jump on and have a bit of a chat today, because this probably doesn't surprise people too much, but we're kind of like weather nerds here, and we really enjoy understanding these systems. And there's a pretty interesting little system over us at the moment, which is impacting what's going on right now, and obviously having a big impact on everybody's operations in paddocks. So just to explain that, I thought it'd be worth firstly having a look at some of the change in climate that we've seen, and then we'll talk about why that's happening. the last few months of spring has been pretty windy. That's no news to anybody who's been standing outside in it. I've grabbed data here from this is one of our weather stations. So AgriLogic has weather stations around the state, and this is the one that's in Longford, just as a random one really. It's showing the wind. I've averaged the wind speed over a week period, so you can compare seasons quite easily. This period here is the last spring, and you can see during that patch of early October, we're getting stronger winds than we'd had in any of the two previous springs. Spring's always the windiest month in Tassie, but this was particularly breezy. Here's the rain from the last 3 months. Now, one of the things that I'm seeing here is for the first couple of months in that graph, we've got regular rain, little bits of it, nothing major. The last 2 or 3 weeks, that sort of pattern has changed to getting, some nice gaps in there. But when we do get rain, it's been quite wet. And that's really the thing I wanted to talk about today. So forgive me, I'm just going to go back to the absolute basics here to start from the beginning. So first question is, where does rain come from? Evaporates off the ocean, wind carries it over to us, and then turbulence from the land kind of shakes that rain out of the clouds. Massive oversimplification, but it holds reasonably true. That's where rain comes from. Where does our rain come from? Well, if we're thinking about the oceans that are creating that rain that's landing on us, we get a lot of our westerly winds bring rain to us that's evaporated from the southern Indian Ocean and sort of the southern oceans. We will get rain that comes down the east coast of Australia from the Pacific, and we'll get rain that comes across the guts of the country from the northwest, off the northwest coast of Australia, out off Indonesia. And that's really what's happening at the moment. So the rain that we've been getting this last couple of weeks, this has originated from off Indonesia and it's been tracked across the country and it's dumping on us. Now, climate scientists have got this thing they call the Indian Ocean Dipole, which is just comparing the temperature of the water off the western Indian Ocean to the eastern Indian Ocean. And when that's a low number, and it's a negative number right now, that means that there's extra warm water off Indonesia. And it's currently lower than it has been at any point in the time that the Bureau has been recording it, which has been since 2008. So there's a reason we're getting this rain at the moment, and that's why we've got a quite negative Indian Ocean dipole, and that's driving all of this. You can see the little graphic there. This is from the Bureau's website, just explaining how that warm water, more evaporation, it comes off the ocean up there, and then that's dragged across the country to us. This is actually the satellite image from today, and you can see that line of cloud across the middle of Australia. There's not much of it left, but that's the tail end of the moisture that's landing on us right now. That's still coming out of that patch off the coast of the northwest coast of Australia and off Indo. And here's a graph just sort of showing you that history of Indian Ocean dipole data, and you can see here we've just plunged. So that looks like a bit of a problem, but we can get some solace in that these systems don't last long. So what's coming up? This is what the forecast IOD is for the next few months. Now, it's kicking back up again, and that's what it almost always does. So the monsoon season kicks in and that lifts it back up. It's worth noting that it hasn't actually come up yet, but this will be updated regularly. And on those squiggly grey lines are all the different models that are out there. So every model in the world agrees that it's going to come back up. So we're not going to see this for long, but we've certainly got it now. This is the Bureau's 3-month rainfall forecast for December to February, and this is reasonably recently out. And you can see that, yeah, it's wet now. We know it's wet now, but for the summer, it's not actually forecast to be particularly wet. Our likelihood is, most likely is we're going to be pretty close to average. just quickly bring up the temperature graph there, because this is relevant to rainfall in that your water use is actually going to be a lot higher. You can see that we might be getting average rainfall, but we're going to be getting above average temperatures, and Marek will talk a bit more about that in a bit. The other question I'm getting a bit at the moment is, if it's so predictable, we can see that IOD below, we know there's going to be rain, why are the forecasts jumping around so much at the moment? Well, there's more moisture in the system, so there's an increased probability of rain, but it's actually the delivery mechanisms, the low pressure systems that grab that moisture that really determine how wet we get. And we've got these things called cut-off low pressure systems, and they are really hard to predict and where they move. They bounce all over the place. And we were having the discussion here trying to understand what goes on. And the best analogy I could come up with is, it's kind of like you've got that bad uncle who's turned up to the 5-year-old's party, and he just likes setting, just making things a little bit more interesting. So he's bought a pile of water pistols, and that's like the IOD is like. It's this pile of water pistols that he's thrown into the room with the kids, and they've picked them all up and they're running around and they're having a great time, but nobody knows where they're actually going to go. They're completely unpredictable. You know you're going to get wet. You don't know how much. You don't know how often. So those toddlers running around the room, that's those low pressure systems, makes it very hard for the Bureau. The model run today will be different to the model run tomorrow, and it will make a major difference to how much rain we might get out of any one event. That's it from me. I just wanted to quickly have that overview. Hope that sets the scene for what Marek's going to talk about next. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruben. Thanks, Ruben. Thanks for that. Now we'll just go on to those weather systems that come across that are highly unpredictable. One of the biggest issues we get from that is seeing that amount of rainfall on the horizon and going, when do we irrigate? Or a lot of people just go, we're not going to irrigate because we've got rain coming. So often that can really hurt us down the track in terms of keeping our soil in conditions that optimize our water holding capacity. And this really has an impact later on in the season when our evapotranspiration is at its greatest. But when we think about these, we have to really come back and ask the question, we have a plan. What kind of plan do we have? And we all have one. It doesn't matter what we're going. And I've ripped a couple of these slides off a presentation I did at the wine conference a couple of weeks ago. But we all have a plan. It doesn't matter whether it's your 80-tonne spud yield, whether it's your 12-tonne wheat crop, or it's that award-winning wine that you want to try and get. So you have your plan. Our job is to work the plan and adjust it accordingly amongst everything it throws at it. And when I spoke about this a couple of weeks ago, I kind of referenced it around Mike Tyson's, one of his more famous sayings around other things, is we all have a plan until we get punched in the face. And that's what these large weather systems are. They're just a punch in the face, all right? But we have to adjust and work around it. And the big thing to come out of this is we're not actually, and we talk about chasing yields here, we're trying to get our greatest yield, but we're not actually chasing yields or quality. We're not chasing that, we're trying to maintain it. So we've got a yield potential that we know in a really good year when everything goes right, we can hit that. And essentially if we look back to the spud, to that 80-tonne yield that we want to get for our spuds, you can see there that, okay, we get a heavy spring rainfall event for our spuds. It knocks a bit off. Something else happens, we lose a bit more tonnage. Some really big thing happens, a disease comes through and we even get even more. And we end up getting half of what our yield potential is. So it's our aim to actually try and fit that, try and maximize what we've got. So where does irrigation fit into our plan? Now, before I talk about it too much, I want to just split these into two different crops. And I spoke about it last webinar, but I just want to touch on it again quickly. I'm going to split things into autumn sown and spring sown, because they're two really big distinctions in terms of the impact that rain has, but also what, in terms of crop physiology, but also how useful is that area, that rainfall. So in terms of perennial pastures or also in crop, your pasture seeds, things like that, that's, sits into that autumn sowing crop. And the reason why we're going to treat them differently is because they have an established root structure, okay? Particularly in a winter where it hasn't been wet, where they've had the opportunity so it hasn't been an anaerobic soil environment. They've had the ability to put roots into the profile. So, this time of year, they're drawing moisture quite happily. And that's where understanding your refill point and pattern is really important from that winter refill. For those crops, we tend to always have a wet part of the paddock that it draws our eye. It's really important, number one, to assess, why that wet part's happening. It could be a soak, it could be, part of a drain that's not quite sitting where it needs to be. But also, how much of an impact is it? How much of your paddock actually is it? So we get drawn to those parts of the paddock, but in terms of overall impact of yield, what actually, how much of an impact is going to have to our bottom line. And for those kind of crops, we can use ETO as a bit of a guide to match our water use. Okay, so ETO has a crop factor of 1. Now, I've gone into the previous webinar, so if you want to have a bit more understanding of ETO and ETC, I've gone into that in the last webinar, and they're in nice bite-sized chunks, so you can go back and skip through to that part if you want a bit of a refresher. So ETO with a crop factor of 1 is a great guide to match those crops, because they're getting around that crop factor of 1 about now. Whereas your spring sown crops, mainly your poppies and your peas, so things are going in now, we want to treat them completely differently. So ETC, which is bringing in your crop factor. So rather than having a crop factor of 1, which is your 12 centimetres of pasture, well-grown pasture, they can be anywhere around the 0.1 to 0.2, 0.3 area. So you really got to scale that back. So you can't really use ETO as a guide. So, and as I said, that's in the previous webinar. What I want to go through is just some graphs here that highlight these two crops, and these conversations that I've literally had in the last week or two. On multiple times, and this was 4 graphs that belong to one farmer, to one of our clients, and so it's a really good spread of how we understand what we want to be looking at. So this is a grass seed, so this fits into our autumn sowing category. Okay, so it's coming out of winter, it's got an established root zone, it's just finished being grazing, so it's kicking off. So it's almost like a dairy pasture in a way, while we're trying to get that leaf area back up. So if we look at this paddock, and this is a conversation had over the phone while we're both looking at the graphs, we can see here we've got active root plant growth, which is what we want to see. So we've got a rainfall here in that 30 mils, and we can see here that there was no real waterlogging sitting there. So that no sign of obvious waterlogging. We've got another an inch around there that filled the profile up. We can see that, but no obvious signs here and here. So that's a really good sign for us to go, okay, when we look at a paddock and we have our plan of what we want to do, we've got to understand the risks that are associated with it. Now, I look at this paddock here and go, that this paddock sitting waterlogged for a long period of time due to these large rainfall events isn't a massive risk. Yes, there's always going to be little parts of the paddock that are going to give us a bit of trouble, but essentially where this probe is representative parts of the paddock. I'm happy with the way it's drained. You can see that nice wetting and drying cycle from every large rainfall event, and we've had that 1, 2 rainfall events there, which is great to see. And then, as we can see here, we see our plant water use increasing. Now, that's, windy days, hot days are going to increase our plant water use, but that's due to our diurnal stepping. And I also covered diurnal stepping in a bit more detail in the previous webinar as well. So if I look at this and go, as a whole, if I was to say, well, where do I rank my risk in terms of large rainfall events coming at this time of year? It sits fairly low, okay? It's a paddock that has a lighter soil, type. There's no real issues in terms of infiltration, so that's a good tick there. I've had a rainfall event here that's shown we haven't sat at a period of any waterlogging. If it was waterlogged, it would plateau, but the plants have gone straight into diurnal stepping. That means the plants can breathe. That means it's not an anaerobic environment, and so okay, that's something we can tick off. And then I see this here, our plant water use is starting to increase. Now, if we were to say, okay, we're going to, for example, this rainfall here, we go, well, we're not going to irrigate because I'm worried about the rain coming. We could very easily fall into deficit because this this grass seed crop has taken off. It's already drawing moisture down at that 40-50 centimeters. And when we're trying to get that plant back up and running after our grazing period, we want to be trying to make sure we're maintaining soil moisture in our top 30 centimeters. We go to another grass seed paddock. This is a heavier soil type, and as you can see, we had those rainfall events, same rainfall events. Now, we haven't been able to get our same full point here in terms of getting our soil moisture holding capacity, because it's a heavier soil type. There's a few more infiltration issues. But what we can see here, we've got that rainfall events and we kind of plateau out a bit. This one here, it filled up a bit, but it took away. But then again, we got that rainfall last week here that it just kind of plateaus. All right, so we're looking at this guy. We've got a heavier soil type. Okay, so low-lying part of the farm, heavier soil type. That's where a lot of water will run to if there's excess water. And so a rainfall event coming up is a bit of a greater risk as well. The other thing we're looking at here is we haven't really started drawing moisture down here at all. Now, that would be a strategy in a heavier soil type that I'd be going, let's try and draw down some of that moisture. So if we do get a large rainfall event, we've got somewhere to store it. We can create a bit of a buffer. Okay, so this paddock here, as opposed to the past paddock, exactly the same crop, exactly the same type, but we're dealing with different soil types, so we've got to come at it differently. So you might look in there, I've got 40 mils coming up in a week. It looks like, it might be 40, it might be 10, it might be 5. On the previous graph, I'll be irrigating. If we irrigate, we do get that 40 mils, it's not going to have a massive impact. But if we don't get that 40 mils, there'll be quite a large impact in terms of going into deficit, which we want to do. This paddock here, we haven't even gone into deficit, as we can see. But also, if we do get that big rainfall event, how much is it going to hold our crops back due to irrigation? So these are two paddocks that we just kind of treat differently. So that 40 mils coming up, yeah, I might actually hold off a bit. I might not irrigate that, or I might just put a little bit on just to keep things ticking along. And then if we go to poppies, so this is what we classify as our spring sown crop. There's a couple of things here that stand out. Now, we are all very nervous, and I'm not prescribing at the moment, let's just irrigate poppies, just go flat knackered, because a lot of people would just go, you're nuts, go away, and not listen to me. So we're trying to take another strategy, and one of the first strategies is, all right, let's track that water use, that diurnal stepping, and let's try and create a bit of a small buffer. So if we do get a large rain, we've got somewhere to put it, okay? And we can see here, we've got that buffer there. We're drawing moisture down at 40 centimeters, and then we get this large rainfall here, and it's actually filling that up here. If we were to, say, the Southern Midlands, I would be irrigating here a number of times to keep us within that zone here. But further up around that Crestview Longford region, where we're prone to those larger rainfall events at this time of year, that little buffer down there is actually quite good. So let's just say, hypothetically, we get a bit of a reduction in yield here because we've dipped below the line. That's offset by the fact that what is our risk? Our risk is a large rainfall event can put that crop into a waterlogged state. And then when we did get that large rainfall events, I'm happy with that response. Okay, that hasn't sat waterlogged. The plants have got to a point where they've grown enough, so their ETC, so their water use, is at a stage where they can bounce back from that. So it's that early period that you've got to be really cautious of. I'm really happy with how that's looking there. But again, with this early sown crop, and you're going, what's our risk? Our risk is they're sitting wet feet. We don't want them. All right, so let's make sure we adjust accordingly. So let's maybe not irrigate when it comes to that. When this rainfall's going up, or just pull back a bit. Now, this is an interesting paddock. So this is exactly the same paddock, but what I've done is overlay one of our closest weather stations, and that red part here is rainfall. So it discerns what's rainfall and what's irrigation. And we can see here, and having a chat about this paddock, it has, knowing its history and all the paddocks around it, we know that infiltration when it comes to irrigation is an issue, and the difference between irrigation, infiltration with a rainfall of a similar event. So there's a rainfall there, there's a irrigation there. We can see the difference in infiltration. The difference in infiltration is due to instantaneous application rate. Irrigation has a greater instantaneous application rate compared to rain. And so one of the strategies that we spoke about was double irrigations here. And as you can see, that first irrigation wet profile, wet this topsoil, that second irrigation had a greater impact in terms of infiltration. And we can see the same thing here. Here's two irrigations. So here's a pair of irrigations. Here's another pair here. So I look at that and go, this is a warning sign for me in terms of going, okay, and this kind of then reshuffles our risk. Okay, risk of waterlogging, that's quite high because it's a poppy. But the risk of being able to catch up if you fall behind suddenly just slots up a couple of rungs because of what we're seeing here. Okay, so then when our greatest period of ETO in a month or so's time, if we're then trying to catch up, we're going to have a hard time of it because we can see that we have a risk of infiltration. So that's just one to always keep in the back of your mind. Catching up can be that part where we fall down. And so here's one with peas very early on. But what I can see here is I'm pretty happy with the response from that 30 centimetres. So in terms of the structure of the soil, the way the soil isn't at a stage where it gets that 30 millimetres of rainfall event, and if that 30 millimetres goes in, it just sits wet. I'm happy with that response, that diurnal stepping. But this is pretty young at the moment, and so we will just you got to just actually at the moment there's no irrigations going on. You just got to wait and see what Mother Nature gives us. So they're four different paddocks on the same farm, 3 different crops, and how we'll go about ranking those risks and where large spring rainfall events sit, and particularly then, well, how you rank. Well, if it's a high risk, then I'm not going to irrigate. If it's lower in the risk profile because of other issues that would arise if I didn't irrigate, then I'll be encouraging you to do some irrigation there. The next one I just want to show here is when we talk about things being wet. This is a paddock that I spoke to the owner of the probe. So this is the pasture around the Chudley area, and this is what a paddock that he's struggling to come out of that waterlogged period looks like. So we got that full period in winter. There we go. It's slowly got air back into the soil. Your plants just started to take off, and then we got that 45 mil rain, sat it back up there, and then we're sitting here for nearly a week where it went back into an anaerobic state, and it just kind of sat there sooking, and then it took off again, and then we got this 20 mil, 25 mil rainfall event, so we've got about an inch there, and then it's kind of sitting there again. So this is the kind of one where we've had a bit of a Goldilocks summer, a Goldilocks winter in most parts of the state. Where we haven't been waterlogged, but it's just been water ticking along. It's more like a Rumpelstiltskin winter for this one. It's starting to become a real pain in the ass in terms of how those constant rainfall events are just holding us back from our pasture taking off. And you can see that pasture didn't even really tickle that 20 centimetres. So we've got a long way to go before that pasture's in full growth. So yeah, so a wet spring, it's stopping the pasture from kicking off. And here's another site that we're looking at with peas, and we can see there's 2 probes in the same paddock. So there's one there and the other one there. The one I love seeing, I'm just going to toggle between the two, is that they're looking pretty similar. I do like repetition when you see in probes in the paddock. So first sign that looks good to me shows good soil structure and drainage within the profile. Okay, so that was 18 mils plus another, so that's 18 mils there plus another 8 mils a day before, 9 mils. So you're looking at a 27 mil rainfall event. That's filled the profile. You can see here it's filled the profile right up, but it hasn't created a waterlogged, and this is in a wetter part of the paddock. It hasn't created a waterlogged situation in this paddock, and you can see that those pea plants have taken off. Maybe a little slow, but I can't hold it against them. And you can see it, then they've taken off. And the other thing I wanted to show here was 19 mil, this period here, 19 mils of rainfall fell over, that 1, 2, 3.5 days. Now 19 mils, when you put that in a irrigation context, especially when these peas are, they're sitting at that 4 or 5 inches, and you can go, well, that's going to be heaps. But when you put that in a soil moisture perspective, it hasn't even filled the profile. So if you were just looking at that paddock and going, okay, we've had that large, we've had that 20 over an inch here, then a week later, well, that has hardly been used up, but then we get a bit of 19 mils. Our assumption is, and you forgive thinking that we're still at full, but you can see here that 10 centimeters hasn't even filled back up, and it didn't even reach that 20 centimeters profile. All right, so I look at this and go, this tells me that it's a well structured soil that, you know, when I always compare soil to my kids, it's the well behaved kid. It's the kid that does, you know, does the right thing. So no prizes for guessing that this is a red ferrocell on the northwest coast. So this little bit of data. We haven't used this probe yet as irrigation scheduling, but it gives us a really good indication about paddock, how it behaves, how our crops behaving, and then we can start to use that to rank our risk in terms of, you know, our irrigation scheduling when we do start. The last one I wanted to touch on before I go into our seasonal outlook is this one from last year. Now it was a real highlight working with on an irrigation trial that Bernie Prins did with a Simplot irrigation trial that he did in terms of, you know, making sure that we can get our irrigation right. We did a bit of work at that, and I started pulling other graphs from around the place, you know, other probes from around the northwest coast, and this was that 130 mils that I spoke about early on. And these are probes from different probes around the place looking at our yield, and this is a loss in yield potential here. So when I speak about we're not trying to chase yield, we're trying to maintain yield, this yellow line here essentially is that's our loss of yield. That's our loss of yield potential there. But a real highlight that came out of it, and it was fantastic so this isn't the trial data, this is data that I pulled from other paddocks, and it just replicated itself across the northwest coast, especially, you know, in paddocks that free draining, good slope, well structured soils. We started at a really similar point, which is great for any kind of trial or comparison. And the thing that really showed was after about 6 days, we needed to start irrigating again. Now, remember, 130 mils of rain fell, and that would make anyone nervous irrigating less than a week out. But the concept there that's really important to understand, and there's more data here, but this is just a screenshot of one of the presentations I did earlier in the year, and we deep dived into it a bit more, and I think I've spoken on a previous webinar, was that at 6 days we're already drawing moisture at that 40 centimeter. And so that, if you think about that top 30 centimeters of soil, you're not going to get more than 30 to 35 mils of water holding capacity. So it doesn't matter whether you get 30 mils of rainfall, 130 mils of rainfall, which is the case here, or 330 mils of rainfall. There is not more. It doesn't mean there's more water available to the plant. What that means is if you've got undulating paddocks and water's fine somewhere to sit, they're going to sit wet. And low-lying parts of the paddock that will sit a little bit wetter. But that's kind of where you go, well, if that's a problem in itself, maybe there's another option to look at, and drainage might be an option there that fixes those parts. You are never going to irrigate your way out of wet parts of the paddock. If you ever try to irrigate your way out of a wet part of your paddock, the best performing parts of your paddock, the parts that dry off sooner, the lighter soil types, the spots higher in elevation or the topography, they're going to be in a soil moisture deficit if you try and irrigate your way out of wet spots. So maybe look at, if they are a perennial issue, maybe look at some other options such as drainage. So now I just want to go on to our seasonal update around the state, and probably no surprise for a lot of people, but it's pretty much a holding pattern. The last month we've had these rainfall events that have come through that have kind of kept us going. In cases where it's not that spring, and in this context I'm going to be talking about dryland pastures, so it's pretty much been perfect. All right, it's a similar pattern that we had 3 and 4 years ago. These rainfall events that came all the way through, nicely timed all the way through to December. So we're kind of following that at the moment. So if we start up at Woolnorth, we can see here it's just wet, that plateau there. We're just sitting wet. And last year, so we're tracking similar to where we were last year, but we can see as soon as that rainfall finishes, we can that tail off will come. So this is on those sandy soils, and so that was last month, and then we can see we're starting to tail off in those 2 seasons. So we're just sitting a bit behind where we were last year, and about that month behind where we were 2 years ago. Edith Creek, which is a bit of a heavier soil type, a month ago we were just tracking wetter than the 2 previous years, and again that's that similar rainfall pattern, with similar soil water uptake we're seeing. So This is really important in terms of having where our season shifts. So our soil moisture is prolonging out, so we don't get that abrupt finish in summer like we did last year. And if we go to Yolla, well, it's pretty similar in terms of what we're seeing up at the circular head. Then in the bit further down at Sassafras, we can see here it's very similar in terms of giving us that extra couple of weeks. So that summary there, wet, but and when I mean wet, with the parts that sit wet, but the sandier soils and circular head, they are waterlogged, but they're coming out of it. And this is pretty similar to what I had last time in terms of this summary slide for the Northwest Coast. But well-structured soils to the Northwest Coast are wet, but they're not waterlogged. Okay, so hagging damage, things like that. Just keeping an eye on those things. Any of the perennial pastures or any other autumn sowing crop, look to irrigate. I mean, I know I've spoken to a few people with peas further west that are coming through their growth, their growing phases. They're starting to go in a little bit of deficit, especially on those well-structured soils. And then peas and poppies or any other waterlogged spring sown crop that's gone in, little and often, that's your key. Little and often, don't go stressing them out because you've got a big rainfall coming. If you've got good soil structure and you've got drainage in place, that should be able to hopefully work with it. In the Northeast Coast, if we go to the Pipers River region, we can see here very similar to the Northwest Coast, and those rainfall, especially that large rainfall event a couple of weeks ago, it's just propped things straight up. But we can see here that things have kicked off. Yes, it's filled up again, but that part of moisture is being used. If we go then down south a bit more to Ringarooma, same thing. That rainfall is a great little bit of rain, and some nice rainfall here that in the last couple of weeks has propped us up, but we're just sitting that week or two behind. Then if we go on further to the northeast, we can see here that we've got on those sandy soils, things were looking quite dry compared to the last two previous years, but those rainfalls have just kept things ticking along, and we're kind of matching that same point in time as last year. Now, this pattern here and this pattern here is important, and I've got a couple of graphs later on which I just want to highlight why. Yes, we might be at the same point, but this period here is important to understand in terms of how the season potentially could play out. So the northeast summary, the Scottsdale Pipers River region, 2 to 3 weeks up in soil moisture compared to the same time last year, thanks to the bit of rain that we've got. Same as the Northwest Coast, well-structured soils are wet, but they're not waterlogged. We can see that by that. As soon as we get a rainfall event, it's starting to be utilised by the plant. Now more to the northeast region, which has been pretty dry, and on those lighter sandy soil types, we've matched that same point as last year due to some nice rain through October. But it hasn't filled up the profile. That's the important thing to understand. It's sitting within those root zones, so it won't necessarily prolong it. So we should have been irrigating a long time ago now, and don't stop. Because if you stop, you'll fall behind. In a normal year, you'll stop and you fall behind. You have some subsoil moisture to draw upon. There isn't any there. So if we look at the Northern Midlands, up around Parkham, Elizabethtown region, again, those rainfall events are just have just pushed things out a couple of weeks. Again, not sitting as waterlogged, so this is valuable rain. At Hagley, we can see, yeah, we're tracking behind, but again, it's looking really good in terms of where that water's sitting in our profile and how it's been utilised by the plant. Had a special request for the Meander region, so if we look for Hagley and swing across through up into Meander, we can see here we're travelling pretty similar to where we were same time last year. On those flats around the area, they are sitting quite wet, but on your lighter soil types or on your slopes, you can see here that we haven't actually sat super wet, but I think temperature's one thing at the moment, which once the temperatures increase, that temperature and the wind slows down, things will take off, and hopefully to see a similar curve to that, to where we were last year. But it seems in that area that we're a bit light on in terms of pasture growth at the moment, so hopefully that should kick in the next couple of weeks. And Bishopsburn, same thing. It had some nice rainfall event patterns that have come through. So there's been some of those rainfall events that came through have been quite sporadic or localised. And we can see here where we've got a nice buffer where we were the last couple of years. And then if we go on the other side of Longford, we can see here at Elston that compared to the last two previous years where rainfall really didn't do much for us and there was a big sharp decline, we're getting water use which is sitting within that profile, which has been used in the root zone, which has been used up. So our Northern Midland Sudbury, about 2 weeks buffer compared to the last year. It's probably more highlighted on some of the flatter ground throughout Longford Cressy region, hasn't been sitting waterlogged or wet. But growth was kicking off in August in a lot of those spots. So these rains have just topped things up nicely. So well-structured soils have wet areas. Again, don't let your eye be drawn to those areas there, but they aren't waterlogged. And those parts of the profile, with those seeds or clovers, they're utilising water fairly rapidly. So a lot of people have started irrigating already, as I encouraged in the last webinar, and so you should and keep doing that, but doing that in conjunction with rain. All right, and if you don't have moisture probes, make sure you use ETO to match that with rain and irrigation as a bit of a guide. Now, if you don't have moisture probes and you have a look at this I've spoken about, please get in contact and I can have a chat to you about potential options that you can use to have data like we spoke about in the first part of the webinar. To try and again, I'll talk about moisture probes. Irrigation scheduling comes, third or fourth down the line. Using them to understand your paddock and trying to assess your risks and give you a bit more confidence when these kind of weather systems are coming. That's the number one thing you get out of any kind of moisture probe. Irrigation scheduling comes down the list in terms of how we start using them in terms of a strategic point of view. But yeah, if you are interested or curious about moisture probes, please feel free to get in touch. And if you've got those spring sown crops and we don't see any of that rain in the horizon, little and often in waterline crops, don't let it stress out for that rain that might never come. Southern Midlands. So if we're looking at that Campbelltown area, this is on a windblown sand. We can see they finally got some nice rain in that part of the state, and that's sat above where quite a where above they were a couple of years ago. But you can see here that that's been used up pretty quickly. So there's no free lunch there. That'll be used up fairly fast in those lighter soil types. If you go further down to that Woodbury region, again, there's some nice rain that rain system that pretty much just like an arrow just came down that part of the state. It's filled things up, but it's used up pretty quickly. I think those pastures were happy to see that. And if we go down to St. Peter's Pass, I didn't have a second one there. You see that it's again we're at a similar point we were last year and the previous year, and then go across east a bit more. Stonehouse shows a bit drier than that area. So that Southern Midlands is still dry compared to previous in terms of where it would like to be. Hull Valley, just daisy banks outside Richmond. Just have a look there. And some rain. We're sitting pretty similar where we were. That nice little bit of rainfall came down and it infiltrated nicely and it spread over a couple of days, which was a real winner there. And into the Drought Valley. So some rainfall that came through September and October was fantastic for that part of the water. And then that got followed through with some more that was matching out. I think pasture started to kick off. And so we're pretty much at the same point we were last year. And then that's on a lower soil type. On a heavier soil type, infiltration's a bit slower. We really need to go through that wetting up period to maximise infiltration on these heavier soil types. And if we then go to Cawood across to Ooze, we can see that we're at that very similar. We're above where we were last year, but this is where I want to highlight understanding where that soil's sitting. So I touched on this last webinar, but you can see here we've got that infiltration here, and it's happening within that top 40 centimetres, and it's being used up very, very quickly. So we get that rainfall and we dig a 30 centimetre hole, and we say, oh, everything is looking really good. But none of that water has actually gone deeper down into our profile down here, which is the moisture that our plants rely on to prolong that growth into summer. And so all the rainfall that's falling is being utilised. The other part of that is that makes the fact that, you might go, well, Marek, I'm at the same point, but when we look at this, pattern here, this pattern here is up at high because moisture has got into this part of the profile. Now, what that means is plants then have a greater ability to put roots down into the profile because your penetration resistance is lower because your soil moisture is higher. And so in terms of that root exploration by your plant is increased when you have a increase in subsoil moisture as opposed to a subsoil moisture that's just been dry since, for the last 15 months. So I look at that and go that in this region, things are growing and things are looking good, but the chance of them to dry off quickly if these rains just stop is quite high. So the Southern Midlands Derwent Valley summary, we're catching up at the same time last year, but we don't have much winter refill in that subsoil. Okay, so that's again, and I said it last time, but I think it's worthwhile mentioning again, understanding where your water's stored. So is it top down or bottom up? If you have cracks, then it's filled from the bottom up. And a lot of that water that might fall now potentially might not be available to your plant, to your pastures. Whereas it's top down, that's then continuing your pasture, but be aware that it can be exhausted quickly. Okay, so if you've got options of what kind of phyto conservation or making sure you can feed at that gap in the feed where it might be worthwhile doing. So, and irrigation, don't fall behind. Don't use these rainfall events are a real bonus. Keep irrigating through them. Okay, keep irrigating through them because hopefully then you're starting to get a bit of that subsoil moisture. Coming off from last year where you had some temper rains, which were fantastic for the guys, especially in the Derwent Valley, we didn't have those this year. So we've got no subsoil moisture. So if you fall behind, you've got nothing to rely on. In a good year, you've got some moisture there, especially in your clays that hold a bit of moisture. You've got something to fall back on. You don't this year. So make sure you don't stop irrigation regardless of the rain. East coast of Fingal Valley. East coast is doing its normal thing at this time of year, just getting dry. A nice rainfall event, but yeah, it will follow the last 2 seasons. Fingal Valley is sitting a bit better than the last couple of years, but again, drying off pretty quickly with the 2 space side and killing in both soil types. So I'll just keep gut rush through these ones. East Coast, so it has handy rain, but we're only about 2 weeks extra soil moisture. Fingal Valley, limited moisture, so similar to, not to the same degree as the Derwent Valley, but similar thing there. Keep irrigating, okay. Don't stop irrigating for pastures. If you don't have a probe, match your ETO, and there's been more than what you think at the moment in terms of soil water use because it's just been so windy. If you go across to the islands, we can see Happy Valley there on our deep sands underneath Strzelecki. We can see that that's similar to last year. Nampara, which is near the north of the island, they got a few, the rain gauges are reading correctly. You can see they've got a bit more soil moisture. If you look at King Island, much better than where we were looking at same time last year. Those consistent rains that have been falling, beautiful 10 mil events that are just filling up the profile, filling up that top part of the profile nicely. This is on that semi-coastal country, is looking really good. And Bargara, on the heavier soil types, your Bargara limes, a similar story there as well. So your King of Flinders, we've got that about a 3 to a month worth of buffer, which is where we'd like to be. And it's had a greater impact on your lighter soil types because they kicked off earlier in the season in terms of soil moisture uptake. But for anyone on the island, just keep an eye on your pastures, but to see if that, because we had another early season, we had really good growth in August. Just keep an eye on that early season impact and make sure it's not starting to have an impact on how soon your pastures start to go into that reproductive phase or how soon they start to slow down. All right. So, and if they do, think about your grazing strategies to keep them ticking along, or phyto conservation to keep them in that vegetative state. So our key takeaways and homework: we all have a plan, and it's trying to maintain yield. Okay, so it's not trying to chase you; we're trying to maintain it. So let's go into that season, optimistic that this is what we can achieve. and everything we try and do to make sure that we're trying to stay close as we can. It's not going to work out all the time, and that's where having that plan for when those fists come flying to try and punch you in the face, you're as well equipped as you can be to deal with them. What are your risks? So rank them in importance, and so hopefully that bit of that step through some of those graphs that I showed you gives you a bit of an indication of about how we can use that data to give us an understanding of where that rank your importance. And within that, being topical, where do your large spring rainfall events rank within that? Are they high on the list that we want to make sure that we don't get hit by, or are they fairly low on the list and something you can just duck out of the way and let it pass? And every paddock will be different. It can be exactly the same crop, but the difference in soil type can be the same, vice versa. You could have two exact soil types, but the crops behaving differently. Paddock history can have a massive impact as well, but they'll be different. And be objective about your decision. Don't let that little wet bit or that bit that you drive through to get your spray run, or one little spray run that you just kind of had to crank it up a bit just to make sure you got through without getting bogged. Why is it there? Have a look at things objectively and understand what's going on. Otherwise, they can really throw you. And so back Singing in the Rain, that the movie that I've seen too many times, that twist we want to put it on is Digging in the Rain. All right, I love ChatGTP. I'm like an old man. I'm like my dad who discovered YouTube. You can't get him off it. So Digging in the Rain is for you, and that's the homework. Okay, so whatever falls today and tomorrow morning, go dig a couple of 30-centimetre holes after this rainfall event, or in the future, if you don't have a chance to do it after a rainfall, after an irrigation, one in your wetter part of the paddock and one in your dry part of your paddock. What do you see? What's your rainfall been worth to you? Okay, look at the numbers, what have fallen. And another thing, go out and have a look at your drains, have a look at your paddock. If there's water flowing off your paddock, there's two things happening there. One, it's because your profile's full and it can't hold any water, or, and this is the case for a lot of paddocks, and this was going to be the topic I was going to talk about until a week ago, when I was driving through back up Guy Road, and there was a 40mm rainfall event, and there was hammering down, and there was a paddock there that I knew wasn't waterlogged. I knew had a fair bit of moisture there, that a fair bit of moisture has been drawn out, and there was room for that 40 mils to go on. And I drove past, and the rain and the drains were absolutely flowing. Now, I had an appointment, so I couldn't stop. I was late for, so I couldn't stop and take a video. But I looked at that and said, so you might have water running off because your profile's full, but in this time of year, the other thing is you have poor infiltration, and so the water's going on, but it's not going in. But if you go look at your rain gauge, you go, I had 40 mils, that's 40 mils that I've got there for my plants to utilise. Maybe you don't. Water loves preferential pathways, and your number one preferential pathway is the top of your soil. So just quickly, more resources. We've got just spruik the AgLogic YouTube. Speaking of YouTube, where we're starting to put on a few more videos of how to, and in terms of understanding soil moisture graphs and interpreting weather station data. So jump onto that, and you can listen to Chelsea's voice and not mine, thank goodness. And again, I'll just put one out there for the weather station network. Jump on, have a look, send us an email, and hopefully there's a station to you that you can get some useful information if you haven't used it already. So I've gone a bit over time this time. That's because Fee's not here. She's on holidays in Adelaide, and so I go loose. But anyway, thank you very much, and yeah, hope to see you next month. Cheers.